Assalamu alaikum everybody. I'm here once again with a new lecture and I do hope that you all are doing well and that's what I wish for you. Let's see what is our today's topic. So here it is a picture of John Donne your on your screen. So I'm going to discuss with you a topic about John Donne. Today we are only going to study about his writings and where did he born and when did he born. So basically we will study his life today, and after that in next lectures we will discuss and study about his writings in his poems, sonnets, and basically John Donne is famous for his metaphysical poetry, and he's a metaphysical poet and he has written so many poems on divine poetry as well. There are so many aspects about his writing. We are going to start his life. John Donne basically he was born in 1572 and died in 1631. The founder of the metaphysical school of poetry and the greatest representative of the he was the greatest representative of the metaphysical poet. He was born of a family with a strong Roman Catholic tradition. He was educated at the Trinity College, Cambridge. So this is a slide about his early life. Where did he born and when did he born and where did he get his early education. So let's see what our next slide is. So his life is continue in 1601. He eloped with the niece of Lord Roger and was imprisoned by the girl's father for short year after his. Obviously, I can't read it properly. And he lived in poverty, but during this time he wrote some of his most beautiful poems, many of which were believed to have been written to his wife. They were known as his youthful love lyrics. Wesley has written so much about death and poverty because he was in poverty in so many years. That's why he related his poetry into the poverty. So married in 1601 and 12 children, including two stillborns, and three more children died before age 10. And his wife died in 1617. He never remarried, rare of this time. And in a state of despair, Donne noted that the death of a child would mean one less mouth to feed, but he could not afford the burial expenses. Obviously, आप देख सकते हैं he was very poor at that time and he had 12 children. उसे लगता था कि शायद एक बच्चा मर गया तो वो एक खाने के लिए एक बच्चा कम हो गया, बिकॉज वो उनका अफोर्ड भी नहीं कर पाता था कि वो मर जाए उनके मरने के एक्सपेंसेस. सो you can get the idea that how poor he was, and that's how his life started. In 1615 he gave up Catholic faith and entered the Anglican Church and soon became deep as the most famous preacher during the time. He wrote many religious sermons and poems, and these were known as his sacred verses. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वो कैथलिक था, उसका फेथ छोड़ के फिर वो एंग्लिकन चर्च में आया, उसके बाद वो डीन बन गया उसका. तो दैट्स हाउ हिज रिलीजन started. Okay, apart from this slide, I'm going to give you analysis of my own about John Donne. He was a metaphysical poet. Basically, his poetry attempts to go beyond human sensibility into realms of conceptual thinking. As a student of metaphysics, his works use conceits, metaphors that refers to abstract ideas with concrete symbols. The classic Donne conceit is no man is an island. His poetry was widely varied. He wrote sonnets and love poems, sermons and religious poetry, songs and elegies. तो वो मेटाफिजिकल पोएट था. बेसिकली मेटाफिजिक होता क्या है, समथिंग दैट मैटर ऑफ माइंड एंड फिजिक्स कम फ्रॉम मेटाफिजिक्स. वो मेटाफिजिकल पोएट था. उसके बाद कंसीट थी उसकी पोएट्री में, मेटाफोर्स यूज करते थे वो. उसके बाद उसने बहुत सारी सोनेट्स लिखी, एलिजीज लिखी और सॉन्ग्स लिखे, पोएम्स लिखे. देयर आर सो मेनी थिंग्स. So after a while I'll discuss with you what is a metaphysical poet. So I'll tell you after a while. So let's see what this slide is all about. John Donne's life, 1572 to 1631, spanned across two dynasties, House of Tudor and House of Stuart. The Tudors extended their power beyond England, achieving the full union of England in 1542, and the Tudor line failed in 1603 with the death of Elizabeth I. Then James I inherited the throne and began to House of Stuart, which publicized the ideas of divine rights of kings and launched absolute feudal reign, which greatly hindered the development of capitalism. तो उसको इसमें स्लाइड में दिखाया गया कैसे इन्फ्लुएंस उनका शुरू हुआ, पॉलिटिकल क्राइसिस कैसे शुरू हुए, किस दौर में हुए, और उसके बाद उसके साथ बादशाह कौन था और कौन सा राइम कब शुरू हुआ. दैट्स हाउ दिस स्लाइड इज ऑल अबाउट. Religion. The Protestant Reformation 1517 to 1648 was the European Christian reform movement that established Protestantism and the constituent branch of contemporary Christianity. The separation of a Church of England from Rome under Henry VIII, beginning in 1529 and completed in 1536, brought England alongside this broad Reformation movement. However, religious changes in the English National Church proceeded from conservatively than elsewhere in Europe. So that's how these religious changes have been made in his era, and that's how they went on in that era. So before reading this slide, I'm going to discuss you about metaphysical poets. Who are the metaphysical poets in that John Donne's era? So this is my own analysis that I'm going to share with you. So the metaphysical poets were English writers in the 17th century who were in many cases not even aware of each other's existence. तो उन्हें 17th century में metaphysical poetry शुरू हुई और उसमें different राइटर्स थे, बट उन्हें पता ही नहीं था कि और कौन कौन लिख रहा है मेटाफिजिक्स पे. तो उनके एग्जिस्टेंस के बारे ही उन्हें नहीं पता था. सो अनलाइक रोमांटिक पोएट्स लाइक वर्ड्सवर्थ एंड कॉलरिज, द मेटाफिजिक्स डिड नॉट correspond or form clubs or sponsor one another. They gained their name from the eminent critic Dr. Samuel Johnson, who in Lives of the Most such an eminent English poet spoke of a race of such writers, Donne, whose range of metaphysical topics went from sensuality and spirituality, has survived as a erstwhile reader of the metaphysical pack. So 17th century में सारा कुछ शुरू हुआ, जैसे कि लव पोएट थे कॉलरिज एंड वर्ड्सवर्थ, उसने तो बहुत सारे स्पॉन्सर उन्हें मिला करते थे, लेकिन मेटाफिजिकल पोएट्री ने एक बंदे ने उसको बूस्ट दिया, जिसका नाम था सैमुअल जॉनसन। तो उसके बाद वो बहुत ही मशहूर एक इंग्लिश पोएट था। उसने मेटाफिजिक्स के टॉपिक के ऊपर आगे उसको सेंसुअलिटी में और स्पिरिचुअलिटी में लेकर गए, और वो ही लीडर थे मेटाफिजिकल पैक के। So here on this slide, culture and the thoughts have been discussed. The Renaissance began in the 13th century and reached its peak at the 16th century in Europe. People's thought ventured away from the restriction of feudal belief of God and religion and became more realistic and human. This was great emancipation which led to the work by people such as Francis Bacon and Shakespeare. तो रेनेसेंस बेसिकली आपको पता है कि 13th सेंचुरी में शुरू हुई और पीक पकड़ गया 16वीं सदी में। तो लोगों के जो रिलीजियस थॉट्स थे वो मानते नहीं थे फ्यूडल चीज़ों को, उनको खुदाओं को और उनका रिलीजन को। उसके बाद रियलिस्टिक दौर में वो आगे, उनके लिए बहुत बड़ी ये आज़ादी थी, जिसको मतलब लीड किया फ्रांसिस बेकन ने और शेक्सपियर ने। So next, his writings are John Donne wrote some of the most passionate love poems and most moving religious verse in the English language. Damrosch and Determer in 1669, he is hailed as the monarch of wit, Dickson, and he wrote 5 different types of poems: styles and elegies, verse, literature, songs and sonnets, holy sonnets, or divine poems. दिस इज द स्टाइल ऑफ जॉन डन। तो वो क्या क्या लिखता था, वो स्टायर के बारे लिखता था, एलिजीज लिखती थी, वर्सेस थे, सॉन्ग्स और सोनेट्स लिखी, और उसने डिवाइन पोएम लिखी। दीज आर हिज वर्क्स। सो ऑन दिस स्लाइड आप देखेंगे कि स्टायर होता क्या है। डेल्ट विद कॉमन एलिजाबेथन टॉपिक्स सच एज करप्शन इन द लीगल सिस्टम। They also dealt with the problem of true religion, a matter of great importance to Donne. He argued that it was better to examine carefully one's religious convictions than blindly to follow by established tradition, for none would be saved at the final judgment. Basically, स्टायर के बारे उसने लिखा। उसके बाद आगे लव और कंसीट था उसके पोएम में, जो कि मैं आपको अभी बताने जा रहा हूँ। तो बेसिकली डन कंसीट आर फैसिनेटिंग इन देयर ब्लेंडिंग ऑफ एब्स्ट्रैक्ट एंड ऑर्डिनरी। उसका कंसीट जो था वो फैसिनेट करता था लोगों को, उसका जो एब्स्ट्रैक्ट था और ऑर्डिनरी चीज़ें थी। सो इन द पोएम द फिलिया, उसकी बेहतरीन और एक मशहूर पोएम थी फिलिया। He uses a blood-sucking insect as a symbol for relation between the poet, presumably Donne himself, and a young lady. The flea has bitten both, and in this flea of our 2 bloods mingled be. He extends the metaphor to make the insect their mutual marriage bed or marriage temple. When the lady swears the flea, he continues saying that sexual joining will waste to more honor that the flea's life, or one must admire his persistence. सो फ्लिया बेसिकली एक छोटा सा जानवर कहें या इंसेक्ट कहें जो कि खून सक करता है इंसान का। तो फ्लिया का कॉन्सेप्ट जॉन डन ने वहीं से लिया और जिससे उससे शादी की, लोप किया जिसके साथ उसने, तो उस दोनों को उस फ्लिया ने सक किया और उसके बाद उसने तशबीह दी अपनी पोइट्री को उसके साथ। सो there are so many, there are 3 stages of John Donne's poetry. I discussed it and I mentioned it on the slide actually. And the young Jack Donne, reflected by a misogynistic, lusty and critical persona in his early poetry, the flea, the beat and the song Go and Catch the Falling Star. तो जब वो यंग था तो वो बड़ा पैशनेट, मिसोजिनिस्टिक था, लस्टी भी था। तो उसने जब पोइट्री लिखी वो द फ्लियर, द बैट एंड द सॉन्ग गो टू कैच टू फॉलिंग स्टार, और ये उसने एक अर्ली स्टेज में लिखा। इन द मिडल ऑफ हिज एज he wrote the courting married lover, reflected by a Neapolitanic ideal of transcendent love, but a love also founded in the physical valediction, forbidding mourning, and the ecstasy. In the later part of his poetry and his age, John Donne, the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, religious poetry, holy sonnets, and prose meditation that sometimes phrases, sometimes struggle with chords, transcendent perfection. तो फिर उसके later part में उसने जो पोएम लिखी वो डिवाइन पोएम्स थी और बेसिकली रिलीजन पे उसने लिखी, जिसमें मेडिटेशन भी उसने लिखा सारा कुछ, और परफेक्शन और हॉली सोनेट सारा कुछ उसने लिखा. दीज आर द 3 स्टेजेस ऑफ जॉन डन्स पोएट्री ऑफ हिज लाइफ. एलिजीज जब उसने लिखी तो डन अर्लीस्ट पोएम्स नॉलेज ऑफ इंग्लिश सोसाइटी coupled with sharp criticism of its problems. His erotic poetry, Donne's early career, was also notable for his erotic poetry, especially his elegies. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल थोड़ा मैं आपको और बताना चाहूँ, कंसीट्स वो यूज़ करता था मेटाफर अपनी पोएम में. तो मैं आपको बताता हूँ कंसीट क्या होती है. ऑब्वियसली द कंसीट इज नॉट ऑन दिस स्लाइड, मैं आपको अपना एक एनालिसिस दे रहा हूँ. जॉन डन रिवर्स इज रोमांटिक गेयर इन द मोरा सॉन्ग गो एंड कैच द फॉलिंग स्टार. जो लास्ट स्लाइड पे मैंने आपको जिक्र किया सॉन्ग का गो एंड कैच द फॉलिंग स्टार, उसमें कंसीट यूज किया गया, which sets impossible task for our listeners such as impregnating mandrake roots. Donne sent their reader on the lifelong pilgrimage to find the beautiful, honest woman who, once discovered, will quickly turn dishonest. His point is that nowhere lives in a woman true and fair. As beauty as truth to females do not coexist. He reinforces the idea with the elegy Jealousy, a poem about the death of jealousy in the wife. When her husband dead, she finds another man. तो कंसीट उसमें यूज करता है बेसिकली, वो अपने इस सॉन्ग में एक अपने ऑनेस्ट को बंदे को भेज देता है एक लंबे सफर पर. वो कहते हैं औरत वो होनी चाहिए जो ईमानदार होनी चाहिए. एक दफा उसने डिस्कवर किया बहुत जल्दी कि वो डिसऑनेस्ट हो जाती हैं, तो वो कहते हैं कहीं भी जब औरत आपको नजर आए जो सच्ची हो और हकीकी हो और खूबसूरती भी हो, तो वो कहता है सच ये है कि ऐसी चीजें फीमेल में एक साथ नहीं पाई जाती हैं. उसका ये आइडिया था और उसी में ही आगे उसने पोएम लिखी जिसका नाम था जेलेसी, और जो ऐसी औरत के बारे थी जिसका हस्बैंड मर जाता है और फिर वो किसी और को तलाश कर लेती. Stage 2 poetry, new platonic love. The physical love is based, common, low born. Spiritual love is worthy, unique, divine. Stages of platonic love. Initiated by sense 2, founded in reasons 3, and intense spirituality quality. God is everlasting, perfect, divine love. True spiritual love is everything and perfect. Therefore, two lovers united by spiritual love are close to divinity. And these works include a valediction, forbidding mourning, and the ecstasy. दूसरा उनका दौर था तो प्लेटोनिक लव उसने लिखा. इस स्लाइड पे आप पढ़ेंगे तो आपको बेहतर तरीके से पता लगेगा. नेक्स्ट इज रिलीजियस पोइट्री है. उसके पहले मैं आपको बताऊं वर्सटैलिटी क्या थी जॉन डन की. जॉन डन वर्क्स एज इंक्लूड सॉन्ग ऑफ कमेमोरेट मैरिज सच एज, मतलब पैथोलमेनियन था मेड एट लिंकन्स इन, तो लिंकन्स इन मेरा पिलग्रिमेज सच एज पैरामस एंड थियोस्पी, और ये सारे उसके पर्सनैलिटी थी. नेवर सेंट टू नो हुम टू बेल टोल्स, ये उसकी बेहतरीन एक पोएम थी. उसके बाद मैं आपको बताता चलूँ उसके सोनेट्स जो थे वो क्या थी. 14 लाइन्स की ओरिजिनेटेड मिडिवल इडेलिटी में उसने ली थी, जैसे कि हम पहले पढ़ चुके हैं कि वो भी पैट्रियार्कल लैंग्वेज यूज करता था, जैसे कि हम पिछली दफा हम पढ़ चुके हैं वर्ड्सवर्थ की पोएट्री में. उसकी पोएट्री में भी एक आइडियल वुमन पाई जाती थी. द अदर वुमन इटालियन सोनेट इज पेट्रियार्कन सोनेट. तो आइडियल वुमन जो पेट्रियार्कन सोनेट थी जिसमें राइम्स होते थे, वी हैव डिस्कस्ड दैट ऑलरेडी इन द प्रीवियस लेक्चर. और पेट्रियार्कन परफेक्ट होता है, क्वेश्चनेंशियल पोज होता है, सफरिंग लोअर लवर हु इज डिवोटेड टू हिज untenable beloved. However, other poets include Dane and Chaucer contributed importantly from the source. So next is religious poetry, a more somber and pious tone in his later poems because of his numerous illness, financial strain, and the death of his friends. Donne focused his literary career as religious literature. He quickly became noted to his sermon and religious poems. तो डिवाइनिटी की बात है तो मैं आपको डिवाइनिटी के बारे में थोड़ा और बताता हूँ कि जैसे कि इन इंग्लिश पोएट्स of the 1590s so retain the fleshly currents of Italian sonnets but discredited as ethereal aspects. John Donne did not reverse. His holy sonnets apply the form of theological themes, yet even these show that the sonnet form is more than a rhyme scheme. Donne addresses God the way other sonnetrians addressed their beloveds. Of his metaphors sometimes have erotic qualities. The sonnet's ability to detail the intricacies of moods and the dramatize inner conflict make it compelling, and then carries his intimacy and immediacy into his religious reflection. तो मेटाफिजिकल पोएम्स जब शुरू हुई तो वो कहाँ से हुई जैसे कि the metaphysical poets were influenced by the Elizabethan Shakespeare among them. Even though Shakespeare's preeminence among Elizabethans was not assured in the 17th century, Thomas Sackville, Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, and playwright Christopher Marlowe were equally influential. Elizabethan poetry tended towards grand subject matter such as Spenser's epic recasting of the English round-table legends of the Fairy Queen. Elizabethan poetry was often lyrical and expansive in tone, with elaborate metaphors cast in iambic pentameter. The 10-beat verse from Perfect by Shakespeare. Let's see what is the religious poetry actually continue here. His early belief in the value of skepticism now gave way to the firm faith in the tradition technique of Bible. The lines of these sermons come to influence future works of literature. Ernest Hemingway's From Home the Bell Tolls, which took his title from the passage to meditation. Thomas Merchant No Man is an Island, which took his title from the same source. So there are some characteristics of metaphysical poetry that I'm going to tell you about that. In metaphysical poetry, the Elizabethan attraction to important subject turned towards spirituality and religious experience, with an emphasis of man's relationship with God, mortality, and our shared humanity. As in Donne's famous poetic meditation, which begins, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the man," and the metaphysical conceit that implies extending metaphors and the elaborated wordplay is evident here. So the poem continues to explore the geographical metaphor through all but the final two lines, and therefore never sent to know the whole the bell tolls. So these are the characteristics, and some of them are later the challenge to death. Towards the end of his life, Donne wrote works that challenged death, and death is a fear that is inspired in many men on the grounds of his belief that those who die are sent to heaven to live eternally. So examples क्या आती है an elegy की literature में. The word elegy comes from the Greek word for lament, the historical form of his melancholy poet that meditates on the war, nature, and the loss of person. So there is a pastoral elegy as well, तो वो क्या होता है मैं आपको बताता हूँ. The English writer John Milton developed an elegy from its Greek and Roman origin to be poem that intertwines nature with sorrow and loss. Milton Lycidas and the particular is considered one of the greatest examples of pastoral elegy. Pastoral elegy involves classical methodology and figures of harvest, abundance, or agriculture, invokes the muse and exalt ruler and reflects a neutral cycle of life. Okay, thank you very much for your cooperation and listening. And you may ask question if you have on the first WhatsApp group or a discussion room. I hope that you will get all the point that I have discussed in this lecture. This is very important. John Donne is very famous poem when it comes to literature. So his metaphysical poems and divine poems and love poems are very famous in the literature. I may ask you the question in the question paper in your exams if about the John Donne. Thank you very much everybody for your cooperation. Allah Hafiz.